All right, hello everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar. This webinar is called Planning for the Possible Scenarios 2024. My name is Mathijs Slangen. I'm Vice President for Sales and Marketing at Flexport in Europe. And yeah, I've been advising our clients and others on how to plan for scenarios the majority of my career. So very excited to do that today. What we're going to do today is we're going to combine supply chain strategic concepts with what we see happening in the market. But before we're going to do that, let's cover a few of the housekeeping items, so to say. On your screen, you will see a sidebar on the right of the main stage. And if at any time you need assistance during the live webinar, please message us in the help chat located on the sidebar. You can also ask questions. We encourage you to ask questions via the Q&A tab on the sidebar. And time permitting, we will, at the end of the presentation, make sure to tackle as many questions as possible. We will also drop a link in the slide deck in the chat at the end of the presentation. Then I'm finishing off right now with a little legal disclaimer or note there. Always important to make sure that we have that covered in our webinars. And now I'm happy to introduce the other speakers that are going to join me today in this panel discussion, I would say. Three of my colleagues are here. First one is Trine Nielsen. She's head of our ocean business for EMEA. Next to that, we have Nerijus Poskus, who is our VP of Global Ocean Procurement. And for the insights on the air, I've asked Thomas Kempf, our Senior Director for the Airfreight Business and Business Development, to join me as well. So thank you very much for being here and joining me and sharing all of the insights that you have today. Now, let's get started. Firstly, why are we doing this, right? And actually, why are we looking at scenario planning? It's relatively simple. If we look at the history has actually shown us that we're not very good at it, right? Capacity is coming in at the wrong times. We see that inventory levels are not in line with demand. And we see that global connectedness is enlarging actually the impact of any specific events that's happening out there. And then I'm not even touching on the rate discussion there. So that's the first part. We seem not to be very good at planning, actually. On the other side, we're seeing that the majority of our customers are saying that their supply chain is getting more and more complex, right? There's not a lot of customers who say like it's getting a lot easier. Complexity in the supply chains is actually happening on a day-to-day basis. So if on the one hand, supply chains are getting more complex, right? And we see that we're not extremely good at predicting what's going to happen, then we have to make sure that we're prepared for chaos. That's what we need to do, right? So we have to make sure that we build a little bit of structure around it and look at the different scenarios that will happen. So that's what we're going to do today. We look a little bit at the strategic frameworks and combine it with the insights that we have from the market. Now, if we look at those scenario planning frameworks, there's a little bit of different let's say flavors that you can use there when looking at how to plan and how to strategize. And the first one, as you can see on the next slide, is time will tell. One slide further. Thank you. Yes. So the first one on the left is actually the most easy one. That is time will tell, right? And what we do here is we use any excuse for market changes to actually hide our lack of capability to respond to it, right? So we will see what happens and then we will respond accordingly. The second one is looking a little bit more in detail, and that's the forecasting part. You try to come up with a forecast, which is essentially telling you what is going to happen. Forecasting is proven to be extremely difficult, right? I heard one risk analyst say at a conference one time, there's two types of forecast. The first one is lucky and the second one is wrong. So it is really difficult to forecast, and specifically given also for the reasons that I just mentioned. So actually the next part becomes super interesting, and that is actually, so what could happen, the specific scenario planning, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into that one. If you take it a little bit further, you would look at actually strategic planning, right? And that means, for instance, a value chain analysis, where you combine scenarios on the one hand side with the competitive advantage of your organization, or where you can actually have those competitive advantages, and then you really build that value chain analysis. And the last one, actually, where we also see a lot of, let's say, companies focusing on right now, is a digital twin model. And that is actually where you say, like, I look at different scenarios, I look at all of my operations, how that would look like, what is going to happen, and I try to use also all the data and the machine learning to come up with a model that is going to use or is going to tell me exactly how these different scenarios are going to influence my business, and where, for instance, I should focus on and what I should do. So the decision is almost made for you by a digital twin model. Pretty advanced, really interesting, but it's also quite a massive investment from resources perspective to get this done. In this webinar today, we focus on the scenario planning. So if you look at scenario planning, there's typically four steps where you look at. The first one is, so what are the driving forces, right? So what are the elements that are influencing my scenarios? Then the second part is, once you have mentioned all of those, and we're going to use a little bit of a structure for that, you're going to look at what are the critical uncertainties. What are the ones that are actually massively impacting my business or my supply chain? Then the next part, once you have identified that, is you come up and you identify those different scenarios. And once you have those, the last part is the now what? What are you going to do with it? What are the implications are going to be for your organization? So this is typically a good, let's say, framework or four-step model that you can use from a scenario planning perspective. And this is also what we're going to use today. So specifically also looking at the driving forces, what we're going to do is I'm going to discuss specifically also with Trine, Thomas, and Nerijus, what do you see happening in the market, and how does this link actually to the different structure or the different elements that we're mentioning there. So let's look at those driving forces. And typically there's a good model that you can use there, used a lot also from a management consulting perspective, and that's the PESTEL model. And there you actually look at all of the different elements that where the driving forces are coming from, right? And we're going to tackle them one by one today. So we look at the legal part, the environmental part, we look at the technology part, the social part, the economy part, and the political part. And what we try to do is, per element, we're going to try to see what do we see happening in the market and what is the impact from that on our business. And I'm very happy that I have these three experts with me today to give a little bit more color around those different elements of the model. So if we go to the first one, then specifically we see a lot of from a maritime perspective, a lot of legislation changes and impacts actually happening there. Trine, thank you for joining, and
thank you.
Would you be able to share a little bit more on the elements that are mentioned here?
Yeah. So in the EU, we have quite a lot of legislation happening at the moment that is impacting the industry that we're operating in. So I've just put three examples here. ETS, the European Emission Trading System, which basically means that there's implications for how carriers can use their fuel. We have Fuel EU coming into play later this year, talking about what type of fuels carriers can use, how they get power when they're in ports. And then there's also some competition law that is impacting us. So I'm not going to go into detail on these ones today. It's pretty hairy topics on their own. But it's just to give an indication of the fact that there's quite a lot of legal topics coming from the EU, which don't only impact European companies, but also any company trading with the EU. And then I'm just going to ask Nerijus, because there's a few topics here that I know he knows a lot better from the North American side and from his daily work. So Nerijus, would you mind to step in?
Thank you, Trine, and everyone. Good morning, good evening. I think something that's quite often overlooked is general average. And general average is essentially a mandate that shares financial responsibility during emergencies of vessels. So basically, if something happens to a ship, all stakeholders from ship owners, carriers, cargo owners share responsibility equally, and they have to cover for it. Why is it important? Is with a lot of cargo shifts, right? The Red Sea issues, routings via Cape, we have seen more vessel attacks. Anyways, the risk for general average is probably higher than ever. Maybe I shouldn't say ever. Hundreds of years ago, it was obviously much higher. But there is that risk, and I think people should be aware. I'm surprised to see how many companies don't carry insurance. So that's number one. Number two, with supply chain shifting from, let's say, China to Vietnam, make sure that you know what it means to change made in Vietnam, right? If the goods were made in China and now they're made in Vietnam, does it actually count as it's made in Vietnam? Like, do you know exactly what type of rules exist in customs clearance? So don't overlook. Most companies are obviously aware of that, but with major shifts happening from China, this is a very important topic. So not my area of expertise, but more so an important one. And last but not the least is don't forget the local law. I give you an example of FMC, Federal Maritime Commissions, is an independent agency in the United States. They have changed the rules, for example, for detention and demurrage billing, not just billing, but also disputes. So are you familiar with those? Do you know what those are? Like, for example, if you're not and you miss the deadline, well, you may not be able to dispute a fee that was disputable because there is a new timeline. There is also an opportunity. If you want to build on time, you potentially don't need to pay. And like all of these things are coming into effect. Is your company aware? Are you ready to work on these things? That's very important these days. Back to you, Mathijs.
Yeah, yeah, no, good call out. And I think specifically, if you want to respond rapidly, you probably need to do your homework, and you need to make sure that whatever is happening there from a legislation perspective, in order to make sure that you're ready for that, and not start investigating it when it's too late. It's a good reminder there, Niels. Thank you for that. Let's go to the second topic here. That's environment. Obviously, we see a big impact of that. It's the effect of climate change is pretty visible, and there's always this paradox, right? And specifically between climate on the one hand side, and then like using air freight. I think Thomas, thank you very much for joining and also sharing a little bit of your view on this. What do you see happening here?
Yes, hello everyone, and very nice to be here. So when we talk about the environment, obviously for all known reasons, it's one of the most important topics for the next decades to come. And that is driven by, of course, legislation, that is driven by a social understanding of this issue, and it's driven just by the impact that every human being sees in their everyday lives, what it means, right? And in recent years, we have seen a very, very strong uptick in the impacts of climate change directly on all our supply chains, on our businesses. And to understand that is very important to navigate the challenges in the next decades to come, because this looks like it's getting worse. It's not getting better, at least from the climate change side. A lot of efforts are happening, but we all need to be ready, particularly in this industry where there's a lot of people relying on us to understand not just the impacts, but what needs to be done to fix it. And when we look at the air freight paradox, as I called it here in this slide, it really just comes down to when we think about the fact that around 97% of global volumes are already transported by ocean. Those numbers, depending on what report, are a bit less or more, but this is overall the key message here. We see at the same time, things like the Red Sea crisis and other events happening unexpectedly. And why is it an air freight paradox? Because at the end of the day, air freight is, as we all know, under big scrutiny because it is one of the biggest sources of CO2 emissions. At the same time, everyone relies on it in times of, well, we all have seen what COVID meant for air freight. But we have also seen it now just recently, and we're still seeing the impacts on the Red Sea crisis, right? We're seeing more air freight rather than less, and the urgency becomes, on a very, very short notice, very, very high. So that's going to be a challenge on the air freight side, just because of the fact of the unpredictability and the need for air freight in times when climate change causes disasters, or political tensions like in the Red Sea cause certain shifts that require a quick uplift of inventory into the world.
Yeah.
The other thing is on the commercial interests and market forces. What we can see is lots of legislation is happening, particularly in Europe, but also United States and across the world. But wherever commercial interests are balanced with the environmental focus, sometimes, and we have seen that in recent examples at the reversal of policies at Schiphol Airport, the commercial interests win. And that's going to be a big challenge for this industry in the years to come to balance those two. Particularly the scrutiny around air freight is something that we have to watch very closely. And connected to that, the sustainable aviation fuels, everybody talks about it. And of course, there's many ways to look at fighting CO2 emissions. And you basically have two essential medium to do that. The one is SAF production, sustainable aviation fuels. The other one is investment in modern aircraft. And both put a lot of pressure on the system. When you look at what kind of gap this will create in the years to come, just by leadership in the SAF production side, you see that North America really seems like ahead of the curve, followed by Asia and Europe. And of course, that's something to watch depending on what supply chains you are tapping into the world. And if you want to make use of these kind of alternative CO2 emission tools like SAF, you might not even have access to it, right? Depending on the region. So that's something to keep in mind going forward. And last but not least, when we do see the direct impacts that things like the Red Sea crisis, or also the closure of airspace in Ukraine have, you easily faced with, for example, in that case, of 2 hours extra time of flight. So that puts even more pressure then on fuel consumption, not caused by the industry, but the industry has to bear the burden afterwards. So all these things together still mean a lot of collaboration between governments, between the airlines, and also transparency to consumers and preparation for your supply chains, as you will have to justify your CO2 emissions, probably on a SKU level, rather sooner than later.
Yeah. No. So actually, we're probably at the beginning of a few interesting developments there, or at least that are going to probably change the market a little bit more than we've seen in the past. So exciting to see that that's happening. Hey, let's go to the next category here, and that's technology. And it would be very weird for as we as Flexport wouldn't talk elaborately about technology. So happy to have you all here, but it's definitely having a major impact on what we think are going to happen. We just mentioned a few here, ranging from platform thinking to API and further automation, machine learning, etc. Who wants to start here from a platform thinking perspective? Thomas or Nerijus? I'm interested in your view.
I can take it away, and then let my dear ocean colleagues chime in. So on the platform perspective, looking on the air freight side, right? We do see the rise of these platforms. I'm not going to make any commercials here for any, but we all know the ones that are out there, and it's something that is coming more and more. It's very closely linked to dynamic pricing, right? The ability of inventory to be displayed directly, instantly to whoever is buying it, and also the word dynamic, making it not just instant, but also accounting for different distribution channels, right? So we're very much used to the old way of requesting capacity through one medium and having quite steady pricing behind it. But this dynamic pricing is really going to change something. And with that, the marketplaces that, depending on which part of the world you look at and what's the coverage right now, you can definitely see that the North Atlantic is very well presented already on those marketplaces. And these platforms are doing a lot of work now as well to get all the Asian carriers onto these platforms. And that was kind of what was hindering a bit this development, because the Asian carriers account for, just by nature of supply chains in the world, right, for a large chunk of the air freight coming from Asia to the rest of the world. And so I think there we can definitely expect a big jump as well in traffic through those platforms in the years to come.
Got it. Nerijus?
I will add maybe for ocean freight, I joined Ocean in 2008, and how we used to receive Ocean contracts was PDF, Excel formats, Word documents, Notepad, TXT documents. Good news, some of it is moving online. The bad news, not all of it. But the good news, right? So a lot of it is moving online, which opens a lot of new opportunities for everyone. So in the old way of doing business, receiving, parsing a contract, putting online takes 3-5 days. So if there is a rate reduction in the market, you won't see it for 3-5 days. So benefits everyone, right? When, let's say, pricing is declining. It also opens opportunities to offer things like instant pricing, instant booking confirmation, like just like booking a flight. With some carriers, we are getting there where you actually can book and get confirmed rather than waiting 24, 48, or in some cases more than like 72 hours to get that done. It also allows better contract enforcement, right? If you're signing an MQC, it comes with a weekly allocation that can now be managed much more online. You can see your performance versus your commitment. It comes with downsides if you're not prepared. If you are signing something like an enforceable contract that comes with mutual commitments, right? So if the carrier has technology, but you are not ready, let's say you can't manage your forecast well enough, well, there is a risk that you will end up paying some sort of penalties, because immediate space confirmation means, just like with the airline, if you don't show up at the airport, you may lose your ticket, you may lose your capacity. So I think it's very exciting, and you just have to be prepared.
And maybe just to add like one last point on this one, I think one of the best things that's also coming from this, from sort of the customers of the logistics industry angle, is the increased transparency around what is actually a fair market price at a certain moment in time. So the whole, platform thinking, being able to easily compare the different offers and what they include, I think is a massive benefit for all the customers of the industry.
Yeah.
I'll just add the last point on that is also that relationships still matter, right? There are all kinds of platforms that don't have people behind them, or they have engineers, but at the end of the day, things do go wrong. Technology makes it much more attractive, faster, better, but relationships still matter. We have people on the ground, and I think that's not going to be changing anytime soon.
No. I think you're right there, Nerijus, right? So it's still a people's business. We have to make sure that we use technology as much as possible to take out the, let's say, the manual or the repetitive tasks, and that we can use, like the brilliant minds in this industry to really focus on problem solving and making sure use all of the creativity there. A quick question on the contract enforcement, because you mentioned that, Nerijus. That's a hot topic, obviously, has always been. Do you see that improving in terms of, do you see that there's more adherence in sticking to contracts, or is that
Yeah,
still
so enforceable contracts, the ones that both parties are committing, were quite popular during pandemic. They have a bad reputation in today's market because they were used when contract prices were very, very high. So a lot of importers really think of them as like a way to overpay. It's really not necessarily the case. I would encourage people to really think, do you want to have enforceable contracts? Again, they give you much more flexibility. They give you much more visibility into what capacity you have and how well you perform. Again, they do exist, but most people walked away from them in 2021 to 2022, again, simply because they were locked in so high. So I do think that there is a move towards more, I don't know if enforceable is a good word. We also could say performance-based, right? If you perform, you get better. If you don't perform, you pay penalties. But yes, I do think it's heading towards that.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept, indeed, performance-based. Let's work on that a little bit more. That's a good one.
Incentive.
And maybe I can then take this one into the next topic, because I think, sorry, one back on the technology. I don't feel done with that one yet, because it's so interesting.
Exactly.
So if we look at sort of automation, machine learning, data analytics, one of the interesting parts, so Mathijs, you said that forecasting is a slight challenge for most companies. I think we can all attest to that. But I also think that some of the tools that are available today will enable a lot of companies to forecast much more accurately, simply by using the technology available. And if you look at, for example, the ocean industry, one of the big challenges when you have fixed capacity in a market is if you don't fill up that capacity, you have a lot of sunk cost, or at least some opportunity cost compared to if you had more containers on the ships. So today what's happening is that a lot of carriers take overbookings and create these roll pools because there's still a lot of downfall happening in the industry. So they do that to make sure that when the ship sails, it's 100% full. It's not a great customer experience, but from the carrier perspective, it is a way for them to make sure that their assets are utilized. So it's sort of a vicious circle because with poor forecasting, you overbook, then you get rolled, then you overbook even more because you want to make sure that there's space for at least the containers you have, and then the circle continues. And I think in the ocean industry, this is one of the fundamental challenges that has to be addressed for the customer experience overall to become better. So I think on this topic, there's so much room to improve. And in that context, assuming that forecasting can be a lot better, the enforceable contracts obviously also will become much more attractive because you know exactly what you need and when you need it. So I think there's a lot of space for improvement over the next couple of years on this particular problem.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's
maybe I'll add one more thing here. I just thought of it. While technology and automation allows a lot of great things, for example, RFP, so tender management, right? Like there are a lot of new startups in that space. And I just want to have a call out for people, like make sure when you use, especially new startups for tender management systems, that you are able indeed to compare apples and apples. I have seen many cases this year alone where new platforms are not covering exact conditions such as origin terminal handling, subject to or included, destination terminal handling, subject to or included, and you may be receiving offers that are like very, very different. So again, relationships and complexity is still there. So do make sure that you pay attention to that.
yeah, very fair call out indeed. Those are problems that have been out there for ages, right? And technology is not necessarily solving that if you're not comparing like for like. So it's a good call out, good addition. Hey, we could fill, I think, a whole webinar on technology itself, but we need to move on. Let's go to the next one, which is social. That's an interesting one. So social is on the one hand side looking at it, like how is consumer behavior actually influenced, and what do we see that impact of that being on demand shifts. So e-commerce plays a big role there. Thomas, from an Airfreight perspective, e-commerce, big part of that, big part of the goods that are moved there. What do you see? What is it that you see happening there?
Yeah, you already took it away there, Mathijs. Indeed. So e-commerce is has especially risen strongly during COVID, right? We all know it, and we have seen it, and we have seen consumer behaviors changed rather quickly during that time. And the judgment was still out whether or not that would sustain into a long-term behavior. And clearly now in 2024, we can say yes, e-commerce is here to stay, and customers actually tend to expect, even if you just compare it to the year 21, even quicker delivery times, right? So when we just compare like from 21, right, to 23, the expectation has just gone dramatically up from how quick customers expect their products. And this is really across all product lines, from the daily essentials to high premium goods that are also more and more entering the distribution through e-commerce. And one thing that this will cause already now, and we've seen it in Q4 with a semi-unexpected uptick in the month of November, a bit of October and November out of Southeast Asia in terms of capacity, when new product introductions are coming, usually in the Q4, but also suddenly when demand goes up, and the air capacity just gets used up by e-commerce. And here we can really see that just in 2024, right, we're looking at the Asia's air freight reaching around 35% on just being used for e-commerce. That is a big number. And if you just think that that is the beginning, then this has to be accounted for. And at the same time, you see that that the global air freight capacity is actually not growing in line with these growths. Yeah, so just doing simple maths, nothing too sophisticated, tells us there will be definitely a fight for capacity between the e-commerce and all the other supply chains relying on air freight. So that's a major trend we have to watch out for. And then also the part, of course, where we say this gets even more dramatic going forward is the fact that e-commerce was more with the younger generation, where people until a certain age group were more likely to get excited by ordering on a click and being comfortable enough to transmit all the information online. But we do see in recent months that also the social media shopping behavior, so another side pillar of this entire story, is also increasing for older consumers. So one clear example here is on TikTok, right? I don't know how many are in TikTok. I am not, right? No, am I too old? I don't know. But we can definitely see as well there, apparently, studies show that amongst baby boomers, there has been a 57% increase just compared to 2 years ago in consumption via TikTok, right? So these trends are to be taken very serious when we talk about air freight capacity and access to it for your supply chains in the years to come.
Yeah. And the answer is no, Thomas, you're not too old for TikTok.
Oh, thank you. That makes my day.
All right. Hey, social also actually is not only about consumer behavior, but also about unions and about how we are, like organized together. There's a couple of other events taking care. Nerijus, can you share a little bit more about the ILA contract?
Just real quick, so ILA contract expires end of September, which essentially means there may or may not be a strike on the East Coast United States, which affects two things. One, if there is a strike, obviously people need to watch out and plan. Two, even if there is no strike, people are socially, so to speak, affected by thinking, what if there is a strike? So we're seeing contingency plans and volumes already planning to shift from East Coast to West Coast and Canada routings, especially for the United States. Not in big numbers, but they are potentially preparing for, again, be it a strike or not, doesn't matter. So that is an important piece. Circling back really quick to e-commerce, I do want to mention a word on ocean freight. With the move towards more and more e-commerce, the shipping lines are also adding a lot more premium services. So while there may not be enough capacity in air freight, luckily for the importers, the shipping lines are catching up. 5 years ago, say 7 years ago, there was one premium service from Asia to US West Coast. Now there are 4, and all of them running full. So, and those services are like very fast. Let's say 10-day transit time from Shanghai to Los Angeles with 24-hour guaranteed discharge directly on chassis. It's not necessarily available in all of the markets. You don't see a lot of premium products on the US East Coast and Europe. You do see air products, but I just wanted to call out that there is that trend happening as well.
So even in a tech company, we sometimes have a few technical glitches. So we lost Mathijs somewhere. So I'll just fill in for him while we go, because I was anyways supposed to speak on the next slide. So when we, I think a really big part of everything we see in the logistics industry is very dependent on economic drivers. Welcome back, Mathijs.
Yes.
Happy nothing serious happened.
No, still alive.
So, Mathijs, why don't you go through the demand outlook, because you speak to our customers every single day, and I know you watch this very closely.
Yeah, no, sure. I just got interrupted, but so I speak to a lot of customers indeed. We're seeing a few things. Firstly, is many of our customers and out there are shipping a lot less. We're also seeing that the polls that we're doing about their inventory levels and about how much they're going to order. We're still seeing that they're relatively okay with the inventory levels that they have. They have what they need. They don't have a lot less, so to say. The GDP, the outlook is also is okay. It's pretty. 2.6%. I think is the latest real GDP forecast, which is not massively high. So from a demand perspective, it looks relatively weak, I would say. The outlook, everyone is still ordering, but not at the levels that we've seen before. So that's currently what we're seeing. And then on the supply side, it's kind of a different picture, right? Trine? Or Nerijus?
Yeah, I think Nerijus, you speak to carriers every day.
Yeah.
So tell us.
So there are basically a multiple driving forces on the supply side. One is new builds. We all know what happened in pandemic 2020 plus. Carriers ordered a lot of ships. Well, all of those ships are being delivered this year, next year, and 2026, peaking in actually 2024. So most of them are coming this year. Just to give you an example, like the current capacity on order is 23% of the global fleet, and the global fleet today is 29 million. So a lot of capacity is coming in now. Luckily, we have that capacity to absorb the shocks. Anyways, that's number one. Number two is new services that are being launched everywhere. Shipping lines are acting towards the needs of importers. I'm going to cover that, I think, a little bit more in the other slide. The third one is blank sailings, right? When demand is not extremely strong, what do shipping lines do when they have too much capacity? Well, they don't just park the ships. They can, but that's also expensive. The one way to manage capacity is essentially have blank sailings, or skip a sailing for a whole week and just park a ship. You can go to a shipyard. You can do all kinds of things for that week. But that essentially reduces capacity and gives importers, let's say, less choices for that week. So you've got to be careful with how many partners you work. I do believe that the blank sailings in 2024 will be very high. Just to give you a number of how often blank sailings do happen, in 2023, 2024, the number was ranging between 10% to 30% of all global sailings, depending on the week, depending on the trade lane. So big numbers. And the last, in my opinion, the biggest actually driving force is carrier alliance or cooperation partnership changes that are happening in 2025. Well, officially, Gemini Alliance will be born in 2025. The alliance will have less partners. 2M is being dissolved. So all kinds of changes are happening. And while officially that is 2025, that's the end date. The change will start happening as soon as, let's say, April of 2024, right? To take ships out of a rotation of a one alliance to add into the new one takes a long time. So this will cause quite a bit of disruption on the supply side in 2024. Back to you, Trine.
And of course, the Red Sea has also had a pretty big impact on the available supply. And for now, we don't really know how long that will continue. So yeah, also something we're watching closely. And then I think, financials, at the end of the day, companies exist to generate some sort of profit. And in the current market context, so we saw in the last quarter of 2023, we saw that quite a lot of the carriers on the ocean side started posting negative results. You can say, do we expect carriers to go bust? I've been in this industry many years and been through the financial crisis and a few other big or low periods in the industry. And so far, very few carriers have gone bust. There's a lot of interest in carriers also from governments. So it's not necessarily a rational industry from that standpoint when we look at normal economic drivers. But of course, the financial results of carriers will drive their actions and will drive how heavy blanks they will be pushing into the market and how they will manage the capacity. Yeah. And on this note, it's also really important. I mean, I watch what's happening in Denmark pretty closely. There's more bankruptcies than there has been for a long time. I'm pretty sure that's happening in other economies as well. So looking at the partners that you work with, suppliers and partners, is something pretty important as well when the economy is not trending so strongly. And lastly, any government monetary policy that they might decide to impose can, of course, shift economies over, short term, medium term, long term. So it's also something to be aware of, depending on which locations you have connections and business with.
Right. Okay. So it's quite a lot, right? Actually, what we're mentioning here is a lot of uncertainty there. I think the key message there is to make sure that like you fully understand what's going on to a certain extent, and do a proper inventory of all of the elements that are mentioned on this slide to make sure that I mean you're as best prepared as possible. Good. Hey, let's go to the last part. The last part is the politics, and I don't think we have to spend an awful lot of time around this one because many of us know it, and sadly, right? But there's a lot of geopolitical tension going on right now. There's also trade bans happening at the moment. One thing we know for sure is these will continue to happen, right? We just don't know exactly when, and we don't know exactly where. But we have to take those into account, 100%, right? So that's definitely something that you should take into account when you're planning for your scenarios. What we do see is that carriers are actually responding a little bit faster to it, right? So they're also, like looking at the scenarios in a slightly different way. Would you agree, Nerijus?
Yeah, I would definitely would agree. It started probably like 5-7 years ago when importers started shifting cargo more from like one China policy towards Southeast Asia and LATAM. The carriers also started deploying capacity towards those markets. But we see that the last few years is happening even faster. Like carriers are being proactive. For example, the growth in India, while big, it's not that big for carriers to launch many brand new services just from India to United States. And they are launching May 1, and the carriers are hoping that almost acting ahead of schedule. So definitely see that the carriers are acting much more nimble now than before. Like I'll give you another example. It's not necessarily just politics, but it may help. It's the Gemini Alliance, right? They are launching a very new concept, which will run shuttle services instead of these big loops. So as we have disruptions in this global geopolitical disruptions globally, right? Like shuttle services may actually be avoiding some of these delays because how they work is essentially you have a lot of small ships that are running or feeder vessels that are running into, let's say, Singapore or Tanjung Pelepas, and from there you have straight sailing to United States or Europe, as an example, right? Instead of a ship calling like 10 different ports in Asia and then going to US. If something is happening in Taiwan or something is happening on all the Chinese ports, the whole loop is affected. If you're running shuttle services, in a way, in theory, it could avoid these issues and only that one port would be affected. Now, will this work? The Gemini Alliance has to prove, but I like to see the creativity there.
Yeah, no, I would agree. It's good to see that we're trying new things there to see how we can tackle these uncertainties. So definitely we will follow that one. Hey, so we've looked at the driving forces that are actually influencing our market, and thank you very much for the three of you to actually share that. The next step in proper scenario planning is then looking at so what are the critical uncertainties there for your supply chain, and we can very easily boil it down in this case to three things, which is reliability, cost, and space, I would say. So from a reliability perspective, I think what you typically see is there is a lot of chaos going on. We mentioned a lot of different points that are influencing global supply chains. At the same time, we see demand and supply not being fully in sync or out of whack. Typically, that means that reliability is suffering from that, right? And we will see reliability not being extremely high. Would you agree to that? Would you say that's the case? Who wants to take this? Trine, maybe?
Yeah, I can take it. Yeah, so I was just checking the latest data today. Definitely reliability is not going very well at the moment. On a global scale, it's actually almost back to the low levels that we saw during the COVID period at around 50%. The bad news as well is that the average delays on ocean is about 6 days, where if we look just over the past, pre-Red Sea, we saw numbers getting close to 70%. And of course, in reliability, we're measuring vessels that leave Asia, but we're not necessarily measuring any blanks. So reliability is not only the statistics, but also looking behind that. But if you're a customer using ocean services today, you will for sure have seen a massive impact on the reliability. And it's one of the things that we constantly talk to customers about, really trying to plan for unreliable networks to make sure that, at least from a supply chain point of view, you can manage these instabilities right now.
Hey, from an air perspective, Thomas, do you see that if reliability from an ocean perspective is a little bit lower, then typically you see air freight still being relatively constant? Is that correct?
Yes, definitely. I think recent events have shown, right, whenever reliability decreases on the ocean, it causes certain bottlenecks, and for some particular industries, then requiring a direct uplift. And one thing I also just want to throw in there, as we talk about the reliability part, the air freight industry is a bit different to the ocean side, particularly coming after when you can take the concrete example of COVID, right, where all the freighters basically were flying, but all the bellies of the passenger planes were actually grounded for the longest time, right? So what basically that meant for that industry, it had to go from zero to almost hero in the year of 2022, right, which caused lots of disruption in terms of reliability, and so sort of 23 was a bit better year. Airlines did a lot of homework and learnings from 22 on the reliability on the operations, and I think 24 we can definitely see, as far as it looks, the best year yet post-COVID in terms of operational reliability. Again, depending on the region that you're looking at, very mature lanes on the air freight side, that the transatlantic with strong infrastructures on both sides probably have it a bit easier than some of the production focused countries. If you look at Southeast Asia, for example, they don't have too much direct connectivity to the world just yet and still have to go via a hub. There where you can still see some reliability issues, probably more.
Yeah, Thomas, this brings a really good point on some areas have a reliability better than others. I might just bring a point on ocean freight, come back a little bit. It's exactly the same. Well, globally, you have 50% reliability, right? On certain services, let's say from a port X to Y, one carrier may be running at 80% or close to 100% on premium services, so the ones I mentioned earlier. Another carrier may be running at 0%. And it's not that carrier is better. For that particular port pair, they are. On another one, someone else is better. And you really need to choose in every single trade lane and port pair, like who is best. There are hundreds of services globally, so pick your winners.
And also, with all the blanks happening on ocean, right? If you have like critical needs of goods showing up as planned, then having selections across the ocean alliances is also a very important topic, because you can. So the thing is, you can achieve high reliability if you plan the supply chain around some of the inefficiencies of the industry.
Yeah. So you're saying a single carrier strategy is a little bit of a risky one now, right?
It depends on your business, right? If it's okay that it's delayed by a week, or on average only comes 50% of the time on time. I mean, it really depends. If it's if you're a waste paper customer, it doesn't really mean when your garbage ends up at the destination. You just want the lowest price. So I think it depends on what type of supply chain you're looking at. And this is something that, we of course talk to customers about all the time, because there's also lead time considerations and so forth.
Fair point. Okay. Hey, space, we talked about that already. There's ample capacity. There's a lot of capacity influx into the market. What is it you need to take into account here, Nerijus?
I would just say very simple on space. Make sure that your offering you have or your contract that you have does include space. So read small print. So many offerings say this offering is subject to space and equipment availability at the time of booking, which doesn't guarantee you anything. So just make sure your contracts have that protection.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, and also with the blank sailings coming up, that's probably an important one there. And cost, I think, speaks for itself, right? It's more than purely the freight rate, right, Trine? I think you're always a big advocate of that, or at least.
Yeah, I was quite passionate of changing this one from price to cost, because I think if you only look at the ocean freight rate, that's only a small portion of the total cost that a shipment from A and B can have on your supply chain. Topics like detention and demurrage because of delays, or anything in that connection, cost like of stock outs is potentially a lot higher than paying potentially $200 more for a premium service. So I think it's really important to sit down and look at what is actually the most important drivers in my supply chain, and then try to work around that and be clear towards logistics providers about the specific cost expectations you have.
Yeah, seems like a no-brainer, but it's still happening a lot, right? It's still.
Yeah, the price tag on a simple ocean freight is for sure something that is being discussed a lot.
Yeah. All right. Good. Hey, so those were the critical uncertainties. We'll quickly move on. I'll give a quick, like a little bit of a summary here. We looked at all of the different driving forces, looked at the uncertainties that we have there, and now it's actually the now what, right? What do you do with that? And we have actually identified, also based on the discussion that you just heard, 3 different types of recommendations here. The first one is actually, once you have actually identified those driving forces, right? So you know what's going on, and you looked at their critical uncertainties. On the next slide, you see actually you have to make sure that you're prepared for this chaos. So you need to make sure that you build those specific scenarios, including the impact and the probability of it, right? So that's an important one. So there's an example on the right of what we've been doing with our customers as well. We looked at Red Sea, and then we said, like, what kind of scenarios do we see happening there, right? Ripple effect, mini bullwhip, overcapacity in the market, production shifts, etc. Then we add a probability to it, and then we also add, the consequences to it. And those probabilities, if you add them up, they're more than 100%, because one scenario or the other can actually happen at the same time, right? So that's the first one. Make sure that you prepare these scenarios based on the driving forces. Then, if we go to the next slide, the next recommendation there, it's also one that we obviously have been, a big front runner for as well. You have to make sure that you work with clean data. So once you have these scenarios and you want to make better informed decisions, then you have to make sure that you gather the data at the highest granularity level that's out there, that the data is as up to date as possible. So really, don't work with old data, because that's not going to help you in any of your decisions. Have to make sure that the quality stays high. So there's a little bit of data stewardship going on there. And it helps you, if you have that data, to quantify your scenarios, right? So you can actually add a number in terms of the savings or in terms of what it will do to your organization. It will help you to quantify those scenarios. Last point there is, once you then have made your decision, it's all about rapid response there, right? So you have to make sure that you have actually the product at hand, right? So on the next slide, you can see the different options there. So once it's about rapid response. So you need to make those actions. Once you have the decisions are made, you need to make sure that that you have the products at hand. The products, when it comes to premium services, for instance, or air sea products, all the let's say the multi-carrier strategy that we just discussed, making sure that you actually have some sort of capacity guarantee, etc. All of those products, you need to make sure that you have them. If you start discussing or at least inventory them at the moment that you have to make a decision, you're too late. and others will actually do that before you, and you're running behind there. So that is definitely the last recommendation that we're making there. Last but not least, from a sustainability perspective, like you have to also make sure there that you have the products available to actually close that gap there. I think sustainability is an important topic or very much close to your heart as well, right, Trine?
Yes, indeed. I think, one of the things with the Red Sea situation, and Thomas gave a great rundown, right? There's a lot of implications there's a lot of implications from where the environment is heading. And I think sometimes we forget a little bit the impact that some of these reroutings are having. So I'm just curious to hear how top of mind sort of the environmental topic also in supply chain planning is at the moment. So I think there should be a poll open now for everyone to go and give their input.
Yeah, so on the site and the chat, you see the poll. We're highly interested in your view on this one, and obviously we'll share those results later with you if you're interested in that. Yeah, so that's a good one. It should be 100% top of mind. Hey, we're almost at time, so let's quickly go to a few questions here. There is a first question, which is, what is your prediction of the distribution of ocean versus air freight 5 years from now? Where are the investments being made in the industry? The crystal ball question. So let's start with the ocean part there.
I can start real quick. So in my opinion, the answer is it depends. It depends if we can fix the reliability. If the reliability gets better, then ocean freight will start gaining share. Like, we have a lot of homework to do. So that's number one. And number two is ability for shipping lines to launch more premium services into more markets could potentially reduce the share of air freight and make it more sustainable. I could see ports like Boston or Wilmington in the United States and potentially some in Europe having some smaller, faster vessels that are basically targeting premium services. So if that happens, you would see more growth. If not, I actually would see air freight gaining share. But Thomas, curious what you think.
Yeah, it's a very good question. So I think adding to your very valid comments, I think it's also just about looking at the population growing exponentially, right? And then we have certain categories of products that can and will only be able, to our current knowledge, right, of technology, be able to be transported by air freight, versus some of the stuff that if you just manage your supply chain in an even more efficient way, taking AI and all these wonderful technologies coming our way into the consideration, you can be more efficient. So you can shift that to ocean, and then I would say, yes, that's growing. But looking at the exponential growth of the population on Earth, right, and more economies having more economies of scale and purchase power, air freight actually, in my opinion, right, will just be in high demand, or even more so. And last part I add to that, why that is, we see the population growth. We all know. We see that the capacity is predicted to grow just by roughly 1 to 2% a year, right? Not looking at the post-COVID effects, right? But generally, what kind of aircrafts go into retirement and which ones go fresh on the market, right? So 1% only, but we can see air trade in general being predicted to grow by between 1.5 and 3.5%. So eventually, their investments will have to be made, and yeah, that's my take on it.
All right, interesting insights, completely different, but I like that, the angles that you're using there. So those are good ones. Hey, a other question on what trades, on what geographical trade lane does this overbooking of containers results in rolling, or where does that occur? Is there, can we make a distinction there from a geography perspective?
Yeah, I don't know, Nerijus, you can chip in, but at least out of Asia, this is pretty common practice. It is also happening at the moment. So I would say especially for exports out of Asia. I don't know, Nerijus, if you have any geographical trade lanes to add.
It can affect low-cost commodities in U.S., for example, for exports, depending on the port. Like, if the port is congested, they may not allow that. So there are nuances, but you're right. Asia absolutely is the hotspot for overbooking, especially before Golden Week and Chinese New Year in
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Tough question here. How much of the air freight from Far East to Europe has gained since January based on the Red Sea situation? Thomas?
Yeah, now we have the statistics questions coming up, always the best ones where you need to have your numbers ready. I'm going to take the other approach because of with the excuse of time, but what we definitely have seen, right? We have seen a major increases of the sea air products across all forwarders, right? With vessels into the Middle East, and then air freight uplift into Europe, and those are in the percentage range of anything between 140 and a 250% year-on-year increase from the Middle East air freight upticks, but also other origins like Colombo, where you have that kind of solution in place, right? Again, showing as well that if something in the world happens, just like the Red Sea crisis, how it impacts. And last thing I want to say to that one, also what you have seen at the same time, the effects of India and many backlogs on the air freight side, that's basically just connected to that phenomenon. More and more goods right now being moved with ocean and then air via the Middle East, and India, of course, being heavily reliant on Middle Eastern carriers for air freight uplift.
Interesting. Yeah. All right. Hey, last question. I like this one. Is Flexport positioning themselves to orchestrate more premium solutions from port to door, considering the U.S. West Coast volumes will continue to increase with issues in the Panama Canal continuing? Rail delays may eat away to lead times.
I love this question too. Yeah. So very valid concern. However, premium services on the ocean freight have also premium rail contracts. They are, so to speak, mail trains. They're the same trains, but they prioritize cargo, just like ships, right? They are prioritizing cargo that either pays better or is reefers. Exactly the same thing is happening with rail. Rail doesn't just move from Los Angeles to Chicago. It makes many, many stops. Rail cars are being moved from front to back and stuff like that. So the premium cargo always gets priority. You will get to Chicago in 3-4 days, compared to regular train can be 3 to 14 days, depending on delays. That's number one. Of course, things can happen, like there can be rail derailings, right? Like accidents on rail. Those you can avoid, so it's not 100% guarantee, but it's much faster. And the second thing is you don't always have to use rail. You can also do transloading, right? Transloading, I mean, Los Angeles or like LA County cannot absorb thousands and thousands of boxes every single day of transloading, but for a portion of the market is a very valid option. Instead of risking rail, you transload it and team truck across country 3 to 4 days. Well, that increases your reliability. But indeed, if you're not booking premium, the reliability of rail in the US on the West Coast is probably going to go down in 2024, simply because there is more cargo shifting towards that area, trying to avoid Panama Canal delays and ILA contract expiration, as mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Those are great detailed insights there, Nerijus. Thank you for that, and that was a great final question. So we're at time here. Thank you very much to my fellow colleagues for joining me on this webinar. I really liked it. Also, thank you for asking the questions. We hope that we helped you a little bit in building or creating a little bit structure and strategy around how to navigate in this difficult industry that we're in, and we hope that the insights were insightful to you as well. If you would like Flexport to help you with structuring your scenario planning, please let me know. Right, you can click on the link above, and we will drop a copy of the slide deck in the chat now as well. And we will email everyone with the recording and the slides from this morning. Thank you again, and have a great day.
Thank you.